Now there's tensions at sea once again between China and the United States. The U.S. Navy sent a warship not far from two contested islands in the South China Sea in what it calls a freedom of navigation operation. Now, a statement from the 7th Fleet says the U.S. will fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. China fired back, calling it an illegal attempt at maritime hegemony and that the United States is encroaching on Chinese waters without permission. Now, disputes over the area have also heightened as the trade war continues between the two. About $5 trillion of ship-borne trade passes through the South China Sea each year. So to go further more in depth, we bring in investigative journalist Ben Swann. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, well, I just did kind of a brief overview, but I know there's a lot more to this. What is actually the United States saying, not only here at home, but to the rest of the world? What's the purpose of this Navy destroyer sailing this close to the Chinese islands?
Yeah, well, the point of it is for the United States to rip its shirt open and flex as hard as it can and say, we are the most powerful nation in the world and we will go wherever we want to go. Like, this has been going on for several years now, where the U.S. becomes increasingly concerned about China wanting to control the South China Sea, building up islands as military installations in that South China Sea. And we declare every time something happens that this is a threat to world sovereignty and world safety and national security to the U.S. And so we keep sending Navy ships and vessels and destroyers into that region to say we're not going to allow China to be the most powerful entity in this region of the world. But it's ludicrous, Scotty, because first of all, we have no business being there in the first place. This is not our region of the world. These waters have nothing to do with us. And so a lot of times when we'll go there, the U.S. will go to say, well, we're trying to protect other nations in that area, including nations like Vietnam, and that's why we need the Trans-Pacific Partnership to weaken China. Yes, China's doing everything they can to be the strongest nation they can be in that region of the world, but it's got nothing to do with us. And yet our foreign policy continues to exert our Navy and ourselves into geographical locations where we don't need to be.
Well, and that's the thought of it, because the Chinese, how did they view this? Obviously, did they see this as more of just a playful game, or was this actually a direct, aggressive move by our military against theirs?
I don't think they see it necessarily as an act of war or that they're being drawn into a war. So there are some people who see this and they get worried because they think there's going to be some kind of war take place between the U.S. and China. I don't think that's where we're headed with any of this. The U.S. and China are far too dependent on each other in terms of trade and economy to ever get to that point, I think. But what I do think is happening is it's a chance for the U.S. to kind of thumb its nose at China and say, we're going to embarrass you a little bit by demonstrating that we are the strongest, most powerful nation, and you are not. And so when China attempts to exert itself over all the nations in that part of the world, the U.S. is kind of sticking their nose in there and saying, you're not as strong as you think you are, we're still stronger. And so it's really just kind of this, for lack of a better term, you know, it's a pissing contest between these two nations to say who is actually bigger, stronger, tougher, more advanced. That's really what's happening here, and it does nobody any good.
Well, and that's the thing right now, considering we do have the trade war that's going on right now. Do you think it would do better off, even if this was just a routine exercise, as the Navy's even possibly claiming that this is what they do, that because there's such escalating tensions between us, that we should be a little bit more, I don't want to say the word sensitive, but more careful in these moves so that they aren't taken as an act of aggression, not only by China, but those that might be allies of China?
Yeah, I absolutely think that we should. Look, the U.S. has this idea that the entire world belongs to it, and that anytime any other nation does anything, that it becomes a threat to the world, therefore a threat to the United States. I mean, Vice President Mike Pence recently just gave a speech in which he talked about the Arctic Ocean, and he referred to Russian ships and Chinese ships making, his words, incursions into the Arctic Ocean. Are you telling me that the Chinese and the Russians do not have a right to have ships move into the Arctic Ocean? I mean, this idea that the entire Earth belongs to the U.S. and that we must therefore decide who gets to go where they're allowed to be, and that we go anywhere we want is ludicrous. It's also ludicrous when the U.S. starts to get bent out of shape over the idea that the Chinese are building up these islands in the ocean, which are essentially these giant concrete islands that they're putting military bases on. Yes, absolutely the Chinese are doing that. But how many bases does the United States have around the world, including in countries that don't even want them there? We have more bases around the world than any other nation in the history of mankind. And if a nation like China puts one base in the ocean, or two or three, it's a threat to world security. So the whole thing, I think, for the public, at least anybody who's awake, says this is absolutely a double standard on every level.
Absolutely. And one quick question before I let you go. You know, one of the reasons why there's so much alarm about the Chinese building up on that is the thought that those islands could possibly launch a missile that could even somehow attach to the United States, actually land here somehow. Is there any sort of credibility to that, or is that just more fear-mongering by those that just want to justify aggression?
I think if you're going to place a concrete island close enough to hit the United States with a missile, you could move it a lot closer than the Chinese are moving it. It's certainly a lot closer. The U.S. Military installations on Guam are a lot closer to China than those Chinese islands are to the United States by a long shot.
Okay, well, thank you so much for once again explaining us a very complicated issue involving two very important countries. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. Scottie, thanks.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.